Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Saturday Week 18 Wild Card Round 3-game slate. I think that's all the words I had to say over on Draftkings. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you just new, like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow. That's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you want to follow me over on social media, you can also in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. If you want to access all the sheets that I cover for pretty much each and every single sport, I have all those listed down below. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And as you can see, I only have a few guys listed here, and you're going to see that throughout the video because I don't talk about every single player at every single position. One, that'll take forever, and two, I just don't have interest in everybody, so why talk about them? And it'll keep the video a little bit shorter. And it's only Tuesday, so things can obviously change throughout the week depending on COVID news, injury things, and things like that. But as of right now, this is who I have some interest in. But up top, we have Josh Allen at $7,500. He's the most expensive quarterback on the slate, but I feel like it's going to be a main priority to build around Josh Allen on this slate. I know it costs a little bit of money, but we have some other viable quarterbacks too. Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, they're on the slate, and they've been pretty good this season, although Tom Brady's went off the past 3 weeks, gets a tougher matchup versus Washington, and Russell Wilson's definitely faded off from his super hot start to the season, looking like an MVP candidate. I don't think anyone's talking about that anymore. He's definitely faded away. He gets a tough matchup versus the Rams. I know the matchup here versus the Colts isn't exactly great, but this is going to be a pretty hot game for fantasy purposes. You have the highest total on the slate at 51.5 here, and the Bills have the highest implied team total on the slate. He's got some good skill position players to work with, and Stefan Diggs, one of the best wide receivers in football this season. Looks like Cole Beasley's going to be out, unfortunately, but you still have John Brown, Gabriel Davis, and Isaiah McKenzie. It's still a fun offense, and we saw that last week versus the Miami Dolphins, where they put up 50-plus points. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to see Josh Allen in the playoffs. I'd say he's QB3 this season, right behind Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. He's been having a phenomenal season. His numbers on the year, close to 300 passing yards per game, well over 2 passing touchdowns, not really turning the ball over too much. Going down the field at nearly 8 yards per attempt, close to a 70% completion percentage. Plus, he gives you a little bit of an added floor as well because he does have some rushing upside. Now, he doesn't run the ball quite as much as a guy like Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, but still close to 30 rushing yards per game and half a rushing touchdown per game. So you always have a little bit of a floor there and a higher ceiling as well when you roster Josh Allen. Now, the matchup versus the Colts as the quarterback, I wouldn't say it's the greatest in the world. They're 8th versus the pass, and only allowing the 11th fewest points per game to the quarterback position. Not even 2 passing touchdowns and less than 260 passing yards per game. But Josh Allen and the Bills' offense has been a treat to watch this season, and I expect that to continue here in the playoffs. They're playing at home with a team total of 29. I assume Josh Allen's probably going to have multiple touchdowns in this game. I would not be surprised if he gets close to 300 yards, and I would expect the team to just keep on rolling on like they have been doing all season. So Allen, I know he's pretty expensive, but I feel like he's just going to be one of those guys that they're going to have to build around on this slate because he's Josh Allen. He's just been so fantastic this season. Then dropping down to some cheaper quarterbacks. Because if I like Josh Allen, I'm going to try to build around him. Yeah, Tom Brady, I kind of already went over that. They're viable. It's just I don't love those matchups, and I don't really like the matchup here for Josh Allen either, but he's just been so consistently good all season long. But anyway, if you need a cheap quarterback, on the flip side of this game, we have Phillip Rivers at $5,400, and they are 6.5-point dogs here, and they're on the road. So, and if they can't just come out here and establish their own Jonathan Taylor, Phillip Rivers could be asked to throw the ball around 40 times in this game if they're trailing, which I assume is going to be the case. Now, it might not be the most pretty thing in the world, but if he can get you close to 300 yards and multiple touchdowns, he could pay off his price point at $5,400. Now, the upside is very limited with Phillip Rivers. Most of his games this season have been in the teens, and we said a couple of decent games, but for the most part, the upside is very, very limited. I think we all know that Phillip Rivers is washed at this point, and if Josh Allen happens to go absolutely off, or a guy like Tom Brady or even Russell Wilson, these cheap quarterbacks are probably going to keep you in the dust because they just don't have the upside of those kind of guys. Like Josh Allen, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago in Denver in a 3-game Saturday slate, Allen had around 40 Draftkings points, and the cheap quarterbacks, they just really can't come close to that. So that's the kind of drawback you have of using these cheap quarterbacks. Yeah, they can allow you to fit in some more expensive stud players, but even then, the most expensive skill position player on the slate, I believe, is Stefan Diggs, and I don't even think he's $8,000. Well, I forget the exact price tag, but we'll see that in a couple minutes. But I'm pretty sure it's like $7,700. So it's not like we have to absolutely scrape the bottom of the barrel here for value. I'd rather get some value elsewhere. So that's kind of the risk of using a cheap quarterback. If the matchup is good versus Buffalo, I mean, versus quarterbacks this season, they haven't exactly been that great. They rank 19th versus quarterbacks. Now, they are 12th DVA versus the pass, which is top half in the league, but allowing close to 20 DraftKings points per game, 250 passing yards, and less than 1.5 passing touchdowns. So it's not exactly great, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. And at $5,400, I don't hate it. And at 51.5 point over under, although I just think the upside is pretty limited. Then if you want to get crazy, we have John Wolford here at $4,900. It sounds like Jared Goff is going to miss this game once again. Now if Jared Goff plays, I guess he makes a halfway interesting option versus Seattle, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be good to go. So Wolford checks in at below $5,000. Now again, upside is very limited here. They only have a team total at 19.5 here and a 43-point over-under. They're also 4-point dogs here. And Seattle, if you look on paper, it's going to look like they suck versus the pass. They rank 23 versus pass, and they're 27 versus quarterbacks, allowing 300 passing yards per game. Although, keep in mind, a lot of the damage was done early on in the season. The back half of this season, they've actually improved a ton versus the pass. Although, if you look at the recent schedule, they haven't exactly been playing the best quarterbacks in the world, so maybe that has something to do with it as well. But at $4,100, it really opens up your lineup. And the thing I like about Wolford is that he has some rushing upside. And it's hard to get rushing upside from quarterbacks that are below $5,000. His one start last week, he threw the ball 38 times. He had 56 rushing yards on 6 rushing attempts, although I think this has 4, but I'm pretty sure it was 6. I might have counted a couple of scrambles or something. But anyway, Wolford at that price point, I think he's viable just because he can run the football. If he can get you like 200 plus passing yards, get a passing touchdown or 2, and add 50 yards on the ground, that's not that bad. But keep in mind, if you roster a cheap quarterback, you just have to cross your fingers and hope that Josh Allen doesn't go for like 35, 40 some points in this one. But I think that's it for the quarterbacks, and we'll move on to the running back position. And up top, we have the most expensive player on the slate. I was thinking it was Diggs, but it's actually, in fact, Jonathan Taylor. He comes in right below $8,000 at $7,900. He's coming off an absolute monster day versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. He had 30 carries, over 41 DraftKings points, 253 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and actually had a touchdown, got called back for holding, so it could have even been a bigger day. But yeah, he absolutely crushed, and ever since he took over like bell cow duties, and I want to say it's been like since week 11 versus Green Bay, so when we started to see his usage get ramped back up, he has been fantastic. Now the only problem here is that they're 6.5 point dogs, so I feel like that if they are trailing this game and the Buffalo Bills just come out the gates hot and they can't establish their own Jonathan Taylor, it could be more of a Nyheim Hines game where he's just getting a bunch of dump offs in the backfield. So I'm not sure if we absolutely have to jam in Jonathan Taylor on this slate, because personally, the first 2 guys I want to build around is Josh Allen and Stefan Diggs, and both those guys are around the mid $7,000 range. Now, if we can afford Jonathan Taylor as well, I think that's great. If not, I don't think it's the end of the world, because I feel like some of these cheap running backs can give us somewhat similar production, as long as he doesn't get over 200 rushing yards again and 2 touchdowns on a point per dollar basis. I don't think he's an absolute must play, and I would say he's like the third option when you just include the big 3 on the slate, which I would say is Josh Allen, Stefan Diggs, and Jonathan Taylor. Now, there's a couple other good wide receivers like DK Metcalf, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, those kind of guys. They're all viable. It's just that I think those are like the big 3 on this slate. Now, the matchup here versus Buffalo, it's kind of just middle of the road. They've been mid-pack versus running backs this season. They're ranked 17th versus the run, which actually corresponds with their ranking as being 17th versus running backs, allowing close to 100 rushing yards per game, close to a rushing touchdown. Not really too much through the air, but the key to success for Indy in this game is going to just establish throwing Jonathan Taylor. If they can keep the ball out of Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills offense hands as long as possible and just grind the clock out with Jonathan Taylor, I'm going to imagine that's going to be their game plan for this game, just so Josh Allen gets the ball out of hands. Like, I say that every time a team plays the Chiefs, like, they're not that great versus the run, and the key to success is keeping the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands as long as possible. I feel like that's what the Colts are going to try to do here. Not sure if it's exactly going to work, but assuming Taylor gets 20 plus touches, I assume he's going to have a pretty good game. I just don't think he's an absolute must play on this slate, given that price point of nearly $8,000. And dropping down, we have some more mid-range affordable running backs. And we'll start with Cam Akers at $5,100. And he was very, very questionable coming to that game last week versus Arizona Cardinals, but it didn't really seem to matter with his usage. He still got over 20 carries in that game. I think he had a target or 2. Was not good at all with his carries. I want to say he had ended the game around 30-some rushing yards, and that's not good at all when you had over 20 carries. So he's very, very inefficient here. And the matchup versus Seattle is not something I'm too excited about. They're much worse versus the pass than they are versus the run. 7th DB versus the run compared to being 20th DB versus the pass. But when it comes to fantasy points given up per game to the running back position, they're more so mid-pack actually. Not more so. They are exactly mid-pack, 16th versus running backs, allowing over 24 DraftKings points per game. Not much numbers in the rushing department. Only 73 rushing yards per game, less than a rushing touchdown. But they are allowing over a quarter of a receiving touchdown per game to the running back position. Now that's something you can really count on here for Cam Akers, just to rack up some receiving touchdowns in this game. But if he can get us 20 plus touches at $5,100, we know the guy's a talented running back. Henderson's not going to be back, and Malcolm Brown's more in a reserved role. So assuming Akers is going to be the main guy here, get us 20 plus touches at that price point, I'd say he's one of the better running backs to use on the slate, despite them having a team total below 20 points. Because on small slates, give me a running back that's going to get a ton of touches, and usually those guys are a lot more expensive than $5,100. So definitely liking Akers here, despite all the bad things going on for the Rams with Cooper Kupp having COVID, although I think he's going to be able to return. But if Jared Goff is out, that's obviously a big downgrade to the offense, but still, it's mainly just a price thing here for me. J.D. McKissic at $4,800. I didn't list Antonio Gibson here just because I feel like the football team is going to be trailing in this game. They are 8.5-point dogs here, and they have a pretty low implied team total of 18.25. And the matchup as a running back, it is pretty bad versus the Buccaneers, but this is why I like J.D. McKissic. So let me get into this really quick. So the Buccaneers, they are first year versus the run, and they're allowing 60 rushing yards per game and half a rushing touchdown per game. But their one soft spot on defense when it comes to running backs, they're allowing a lot of catches to them, over 6 catches per game and a little bit over 40 receiving yards. So if J.D. McKissic, the king of dump-offs, if he can get us like 8 to 10 catches in this game, he can pay off his price point below $5,000. He's got close to a 20% target share this season, a 32% weighted opportunity share, about 7 targets per game. I mean, he's not like a guy that's going to get 100 receiving yards, but if he can get us like 8 to 10 catches, I don't know if he gets us 50 receiving yards, whatever. It's really valuable points on a PPR site like DraftKings. So as long as Alex Smith is going to be mainly good to go for this game, I saw in some news that they could be like rotating their quarterbacks, which would make things a bit confusing, but I'm hoping Alex Smith is going to be the main guy here because we know he's the king of just dumping it off to J.D. McKissic, and I feel like he can definitely be the better point per dollar option than Antonio Gibson, assuming he doesn't have a huge game on the ground. But running backs don't typically have great games on the ground versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then dropping down to Nyheim Hines here, I feel like he's a very, very similar play to J.D. McKissic, as Antonio Gibson is the main running back on that team. McKissic is more the pass catcher. And then on the Colts, Jonathan Taylor is the main running back, and then Nyheim Hines is the main pass catching back, and he actually has been kind of consistent this season. 6 out of the past 7 games for him, he's scored at least double-digit points, and I'm assuming the Colts are going to return this game, so I would not be surprised if he sees anywhere from 5 to 8 targets in this game. And looking at the numbers this season, close to a 15% target share, close to 5 targets per game, 4 catches per game. The Bills are mid-pack versus running backs. Now, when it comes to how they've done through the air versus running backs, I would say they've actually been kind of tough on that. Less than 5 catches per game, less than 40 receiving yards, and really nothing through the air in terms of touchdowns. But I still like Nyheim Hines here from just a perspective of the Colts trailing this game, which I think is more than likely going to be the case as 6.5-point dogs here. So I feel like he's a very intriguing play. And then you have the Bills backfield here of Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. And this is a very split backfield. For the most part, these guys are going to play half the snaps. Now, Zach Moss, he's the main rusher on this offense. And Devin Singletary, well, he's not like just a pass-catching back solely like J.D. McKissic and Nyheim Hines. He'll still get carries on the ground, but he's more of the pass-catching back between the two. So in projections, it's usually going to grade out better for Devin Singletary because he has this more PPR upside. That's what the site is on DraftKings. You got PPR scoring, so Singletary's always going to grade out a little bit better in that regard because of that. But both these guys are fine. Now, with the Bills being 6.5-point favorites here, and you're assuming they're playing with the lead, I can see them pound the rock with Zach Moss in the second half of this game. Not saying they're going to absolutely blow out the Colts, but if you think they're going to be playing with the lead, I would make more sense that Zach Moss could be the better tournament play. I still think people are going to play Singletary over Zach Moss just because, personally, I'd rather play Singletary at a little bit cheaper of a price point because they can catch a couple balls. If you're looking at their passing numbers this season, close to 3 targets per game for Singletary, not even 1.5 targets per game for Zach Moss, and 9% target share compared to a 3.8. So, yeah, Singletary does look a little bit more appealing here, but in tournaments, I don't think Zach Moss is a bad play, assuming the Bills do play with a lead here. Now, the Colts versus running backs this season, it's not a great matchup for these guys. They're 9th versus the run and on the 12th fewest points range of the running back position, but I still think both guys are in play just because the Bills, they have the highest implied team on the slate, and they should have some scoring opportunity here. It's just really going to come down to probably who scores a touchdown or not for the most part. So This is going to be it for the running backs. I think we move on to the wide receiver position now. And up top, we have one of the best wide receivers in football this season, but it's Stefan Diggs at $7,700. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe he's the only wide receiver not to have a game below double-digit points. Like, I know Devontae Adams was absolutely great this season, but he did have a game in the single digits. Now, he did get hurt in that game, but it still counts. Stefan Diggs was just so consistently good all season long, and I'm sure that continues here versus the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe not the best matchup in the world because their defense has been pretty solid this season, but versus wide receivers, they have been below average, ranking 18th versus wide receivers despite being 8th versus the pass, close to 175 receiving yards per game, and close to a receiving touchdown as well. Now, the big thing here is that Cole Beasley looks like he's going to be out for this game. Now, that's nothing official. He's still questionable, but he has been ruled week to week, and it sounds like he's not going to be good to go for this game. Now, if they win this game, he could be back in later weeks, but it sounds like Cole Beasley's going to be out, and he was a big part of that offense in recent weeks. So when you take him out of the equation, just puts more of an emphasis to get the ball to Stefan Diggs. Now, the season, close to 100 receiving yards per game, over double-digit targets, but over 10 targets per game, close to a 30% target share, 68% weight opportunity share, 35% market share of the team's air yards. He did it all this season. I'm sure that's going to continue, and he's going to be one of my favorite plays to build around on this slate. The obvious pairing with Josh Allen. Then the Bucs wide receivers, I don't have any of them listed here because that matchup versus Washington isn't the greatest in the world. If they can get pressure on Brady, I could see it being one of those below average games from Tom Brady. I think they're going to be fine. But just because I don't have them on here doesn't mean I don't like them. It's just I don't like them over some of these guys on a point per dollar basis. But Terry McLaurin at $6,300 now. If Alex Smith does not happen to play in this game, it's going to be hard to want to play Terry McLaurin, but it's a decent matchup here versus Tampa Bay. They have struggled versus wide receivers this season. Early on in the year, they were pretty shut down overall in their defense, but in recent weeks, or I'd say the back half of this season, they started to struggle versus the pass, and they do rank 21st versus wide receivers now, despite being 50th versus the pass. So the one pass catching option you can kind of count on for this wide receiver group for the Washington football team is definitely Terry McLaurin. He just has to deal with poor quarterback play, but on the season, 8.5 targets per game, a 42% market share of the team's air yards, a 25% target share. If you want to roster a pass catching option for the football team, it's probably going to be Terry McLaurin here versus the Buccaneers corners. Now, I don't have the highest hopes for him here. I just think the price is nice, but they only have a team total of 18.25, which I do believe is the lowest on the slate. So not expecting much here, but they're 8.5 point dogs, so I expect they're going to have to be throwing the ball quite a bit. So McLaurin could pay off in that regard, although I think the upside is a little limited there just because the quarterback play probably won't end up being the best. Then we have Robert Woods at $6,200, and similar to McLaurin, he might have John Wolford throwing the football, which definitely isn't the greatest thing in the world. I'd definitely prefer it being Jared Goff, even though Jared Goff isn't the best quarterback in the world, but at least he knows the system well, and I just can trust him a bit more. But I still think Woods is a pretty solid play. Now, I'm expecting Cooper Kupp to be back, and Cooper Kupp is actually cheaper than Robert Woods, so there's definitely a conversation to be had there if you absolutely want to play one of these guys, because it is a good matchup versus Seattle. I have said that they definitely improved defensively this season in the back half of the year, but you got to keep in mind, they haven't exactly played the greatest quarterbacks on the road. They're still 29th versus wide receivers, which is a big improvement because early in the season, I think it was only after a couple of weeks, but they were giving up close to 80 Draftkings points per game to the position, which is awful. And keep in mind, they played New England one of those games, so I mean, they're just getting absolutely blitzed. Definitely have improved, but I still think one of these guys can have a pretty decent game, and if I had to pick one, I'll go with Woods over Kupp. But if you need the extra savings with Kupp, if you absolutely have to play Los Angeles Rams receiver, I think both are fine options. Then getting into some more affordable wide receivers, we have T.Y. Hilton at $5,000. And my plan in this slate is to stack up the Bills. And I'm probably going to run back with a couple Colts. And this is definitely the game you want to target for DFS purposes, like the Washington-Tampa Bay one, 45-point over-under. Then you have the Rams-Seattle game, 43 points. So this one has a 51.5, so I think the majority of my lineup will probably come from players from this game just because I feel like there's going to be more scoring opportunities, and Vegas would agree with that as well. So if I'm stacking up all the Bills, I'm probably going to want to run it back with a couple of Colts, and T.Y. Hilton would be one of those guys. He's only $5,000. I'm assuming the Colts are going to have to throw the ball more than they'd like to, and Hilton, I know he didn't have a great start to the year, but he definitely has gotten better the past month or so now. And looking at the overall numbers, I know they're not great, but about 6 targets per game, close to a 20% target share, 31% market share of the team's air yards. He's been scoring touchdowns in recent weeks, which is something he did not do at all in the beginning of the season. So if you are stacking up the Bills like me, I think T.Y. Hilton is definitely a really good run back option just to make sense correlation-wise in your lineups. Then after that, I have a collection of cheap Buffalo Bills wide receivers, assuming Cole Beasley is out, because it's just a big uptick in usage for all of these guys. And I'm pretty sure all three of these guys had some really good games last week versus the Miami Dolphins. John Brown, he got into the end zone. I don't think Davis got into the end zone, but he did have over 100 receiving yards in that game. And Isaiah McKenzie had 3 touchdowns in the first half, 2 receiving touchdowns, and he turned that punt return touchdown. But great game from him, and he's only $3,300. But I mean, I could talk about these guys specifically, but I mean, if I had to pick one, it would be John Brown, but he's definitely priced like that. He'd be the wide receiver 2 in this offense with Cole Beasley being down. Gabriel Davis would be the wide receiver 3. Then you'd have Isaiah McKenzie slide in at the wide receiver 4. We could also see Kenny Stills get caught up from the practice squad because the Bills did sign him recently, although I don't really think he'd be much of a factor whatsoever in this game. But if Cole Beasley does get ruled out, all these guys do become playable, and they'd be nice cheap options to pair up with Josh Allen. And so we'll move on to the tight end position, and it's a very weak position on this slate. So if you want to spend up for Thomas, I think that's fine. But if you don't spend up for Thomas, just punting the position might be the best way to go about it. But up top, we do have Logan Thomas, who's actually been one of the better tight ends to roster all year long. Very consistent in recent weeks. I know he had below 10 targets last week, but before that, we're looking at games where he had 12 and 15 targets. So he's definitely a factor through the air here. Looking at his numbers this season, I know it's not the most exciting offense in the world, but still 6.5 targets per game, a little bit over that, close to half a receiving touchdown, close to a 20% target share, a little bit over 40 receiving yards, a 22% market share of the team's air yards. And the matchup versus Tampa Bay as a tight end is actually pretty good. They are 50 versus the pass, but they are ranked 23rd versus tight ends, allowing over half a receiving touchdown per game and over 50 receiving yards. So yeah, if you got the money for him, Logan Thomas is definitely tight end 1 here. It's just a matter of being able to spend up for him. And then if you want to go cheap, yeah, I think Gronk, Higbee, those guys are playable. But Dawson Knox, if I'm playing on the Bills, why not just add another Bill here to roster with Josh Allen just to make sense correlation-wise? I have the highest implied team total. If he happens to get into the end zone, he'll be a pretty good play at $3,200. And he's actually been getting targets in recent weeks as well. Like, just looking at the game log here, 8 targets, 4, 4, 7, 4. I know it's not amazing, but it's not that bad for a guy that's only $3,200 and is one of the better quarterbacks in football throwing the football. So don't mind Dawson Knox here. Now, the matchup as a tight end versus the Colts, it's not great. They're on the 5th fewest points bringing to the position, also 8th versus the pass, but I mean, you can't get too picky here. It's a 3-game slate. We have limited options, and I think Dawson Knox is a fine punt option at the tight end position. Then as for the defenses, not really fun to talk about, but I just picked the 3 teams that are favored to win here, Bills versus the Colts. Phillip Rivers does not scare me too much, and if they can shut down Jonathan Taylor, they shouldn't have too many problems here winning this game. Buccaneers defense versus the Washington football team. I don't think anyone's scared of that Washington football team offense, especially if Alex Smith doesn't happen to play in this game, or if they just rotate quarterbacks. I think that'll probably create a mess on offense for them. And the Seahawks defense, I imagine this is where everyone's going to go. They only have a team total of 19.5 versus them. I don't think anyone's too scared of John Wolford. They're 4-point favorites here, and there's only a 43-point over in this game, and they're also playing at home, so I think they're the obvious defense to play, and you can save some money with them as well. And with that being said, guys, I think that's going to be it for this video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. You can follow me over on social media. I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, CPenn16 over on IG. And if you help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. And I cover other sports as well, including NASCAR, which is kind of the big thing I do on here that comes up in, I think, right about a month now. I think it's February 9th when it starts up. So just a little bit over a month, and then we do the MLB in the spring. So I'm excited for it. And then we have NBA going on right now in addition to the NFL. But yeah, I think that's going to be it, guys. So I'll stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be the Sunday slate breakdown.